We are looking ahead to game week 9, 8 game weeks worth of data under our belt, so we can start to actually formulate some plans and strategies for the season ahead. And I've got an idea for one that we'll talk about in this episode. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, a podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another gaming preview going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of game week 9. Now, unbeknownst to most of you, I did post a message in the Draft FC Discord yesterday. This is the second time I'm recording this episode. So this episode was recorded in its entirety yesterday. But I was battling some external factors yesterday. Obviously, it's been Diwali this week, and I live in an area where lots of people celebrate Diwali quite noisily with fireworks, and so I was battling with the mic, because literally they were in all directions, and thought I'd done a reasonable job. Turned the sensitivity right down to try and just pick up my voice, but turned it down so much it didn't really pick up my voice properly. So, I got out the other side. I was about 5-10 minutes into editing it, and just had to bin it and call it. Didn't really have enough time to record it again. So, as much as I was nice and earlier than I have been recently in the game week, unfortunately, this will now drop less than 24 hours before the waiver deadline again, which is not my intention. If I'd struggled on, I possibly could have got a useful YouTube video out, but those of you listening on the audio would not have been a fun listening experience at all. And I'm actually quite pleased with this episode to say I do go off on a bit of an interesting tangent in the middle of this one. So I want to do it properly, and we'll try again. Now, there are still fireworks kicking off. The odd one is going off. So they will just have to stay in the edit. So if there's any random blips and bops and bangs, we'll just have to put up with it for this week. As I said, we have got 8 game weeks worth of data under our belt now. Things starting to shape up, starting to spot some trends in terms of point scoring, in terms of selected lineups, starting 11s, etc. for the Premier League teams. And from that, I think there is, for want of a better word, a bit of a new meta developing in FPL, which I think particularly applies to Draft FPL over the main game, because of the nature of the wider player pool we have to consider. I will segue onto that naturally during the main pick section. Because I have already recorded this in its entirety before, I know you guys don't necessarily know or have heard that. I will probably slim this down a little bit and miss out a couple of the segments. It's sort of like having a 45-minute conversation with yourself yesterday and then having to try and word for word recreate it the following day. I do not fully script these episodes. I've of course got my notes, but this will naturally be slightly different. And just through the sheer fatigue factor of having to do it again, I'll try and do some shortcuts where I can. So recording this on Wednesday, the 27th of October, we've had plenty of European football yesterday, plenty of European football tonight and tomorrow. So still plenty of opportunities for last minute injuries to creep into our plans. So any team news, injury developments, press conference info are up to date as of now and probably subject to change. So without further ado, let's get into it. So reminder at the top, the waivers will process on Thursday evening at 6:30 ahead of Friday night football, which will be between Leeds and West Ham. The main gaming deadline just before that at 6:30 on Friday evening. So don't get caught out by the Thursday deadline. I'll mention quickly again, for those of you that have never signed up at Draft FC, who want to see what we've got on offer for draft managers and also get access to Draft FC Discord server. If you never signed up before, you can use the code KICKOFF at the checkout, and that will get you the first month totally free. You can cancel any time, so if during that month period you decide it's not for you, you can cancel won't be charged anything. Those of you that do carry on, it's $3.99 a month, which we think is pretty reasonable for everything that we've put off there and for all of the work that we've put in. Quickly onto Waiver Watch. The player at the top of the list last week was Cullen. Obviously, had a big surge in his ownership at the beginning of the season when he had that big week, but another big week there. Marlon Okafor and Esteval, some more Gitsia high-risk wingers there. Bruno Guimaraes, Kluivert, Cherki, and Trossard. So a couple of good pickups there. The players making way, there were some pretty bad drops. To name a few, Buendia was the most wavered out. He obviously scored against Spurs. Jorginho was next. He got an assist in Brighton's game. And Tavernier at the bottom there also got an assist in that 3-3 draw in Bournemouth and Palace. The rest, some injuries and players that were out of favour, reasonable drops. In terms of injuries and suspensions, a few for Chelsea to talk about. Gusto got sent off, so he will be missing for this game week, which will have a little knock-on effect. I expect Reece James will probably slot in at right back, which will have some repercussions for how the midfield and attack set up. Paddy Ashile, we got confirmation he's going to be out until December. Cole Palmer, more importantly, for those of you that took him first, a bit of a setback in his groin injury. He's expected to be back around game week 14, so not far before Paddy Ashile, which is a shame for those of you that have been having to carry him on the bench. Romero got injured in the warm-up in the Spurs game, though the news this week seems to be that it's not too bad. Could even make the team tonight. I haven't looked yet. Otherwise, could be back for the weekend. And then the other one for Bournemouth is Evan Nilsson, who wasn't fit enough for that game against Palace. So we saw teammate Eli Krupi come in, who we will talk about because he had a good game. And no firm news on Evan Nilsson, but currently looks as though he could miss game week 9 as well. So does keep Krupi very much at the forefront of our plans. The fixtures for this game week, I'm not going to go through in the interest of time. You can all look at those yourselves. In terms of talking points from last week, obviously we've had managerial changes again, and Postecoglou sacked by Nottingham Forest. That writing was on the wall, really, wasn't it? And we've seen Sean Dyche get given the job. So they've lurched from Nuno all the way to one side to Ange and back again to Sean Dyche. Now, I've put on the slide there that I'm happy to wait on Forest assets because I've seen and heard lots of comments which seem to suggest that just because Dyche has come in, that automatically the likes of Milenkovic and Murillo are suddenly going to be top of the pile again when it comes to defenders. I was pretty low on Forest towards the back end of last season and coming into the season anyway, as you'll have heard when we did our team-by-team preview in the summer. They overachieved last year. So for anyone currently holding the reins, whether that was Nuno still there or Ange or even Sean Dyche now, the trouble is the expectation is that they overachieve on what was already an overachievement from last year. I'm guessing now that they're on their third manager, the expectations will be set slightly lower. And Marinakis is probably not going to live or die based on the fact if they qualify for the Champions League, as probably would have been floated around in the summer. For a club like Forest and the position they're in and the money they've spent, they cannot afford to get relegated. So Dyche's come in to be a safe pair of hands. They won't get relegated. Their squad is far too good for that. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what he can do with that team and where he can get them up the table come the end of the season. Next is West Ham and Wolves seem to be the teams to target. Obviously, last couple of years, it's been pretty easy to target teams because we've just been targeting the newly promoted clubs. Interestingly, both of those teams face newly promoted clubs this weekend. And in both instances, you could argue that those newly promoted teams are the favourites. West Ham just have the one league win this season, and Wolves are still yet to get their first league win. I think they've just got a couple of draws so far. West Ham looked awful on Monday night against Brentford. The team selection was puzzling. Obviously, they tried to rectify it with some changes at half-time, but Brentford were thoroughly deserved winners in that game. And Wolves have got similar issues. The team, the starting 11 seems to be starting to settle down a little bit, but again, I'm not convinced that there is an established first choice 11 there, which both teams are desperately in need of to get some consistency and to try and get some wins on the board. And then obviously the other big one was Liverpool lost their 4th game in a row. You could argue this is as much a story about how well United did and the resilience they showed. But I think given the expectations for Liverpool at the beginning of the season, them losing 4 in a row is probably the bigger news. And, the likes of Isak, Wirtz, Mo Salah, all really disappointing for those of us that invested good draft day capital in the summer. But we're going to have to stick with them and hope that Slot can find a way through this. Into the main picks then. Now I'm still, for this week at least anyway, I've still got it selected as 10-team leagues and looking at the top 200 leagues. That does really slim down the pickings a bit because it means any picks that we might want to talk about have really high ownership in those engaged leagues. So for next week, I might look to, I'll see how the stats shake out, but I might keep it as top 200 leagues, maybe lower it down to 18 leagues, which will just open the sort of player pool that I'm able to easily discuss. In defense, the only player really who I can talk about in this category is Van Hecke, who I think probably going under the radar a little bit if you look at his overall season stats. He's hit the DEFCON threshold in 4 out of the last 5 games. Brighton are yet to keep a clean sheet though, which is probably what's holding him back overall in the defender tally. So any of the points he has had, he's had to scrounge himself. They've got an away trip to United this weekend, so I don't expect their first clean sheet to come, but could be a sort of a boring pick to pick up the DEFCON points again. In midfield, we've got a few more options. Now, the first one on the list you'll see is Florentino for Burnley, who technically speaking should be appearing later on in the hidden gem section because his ownership is less than 10%. In fact, it's just 1%, even in those engaged top 210 team leagues. I've put a gem next to him. I think he is going to explode in ownership this week. When fit, he will play 90 minutes every single week, and he's averaging just over 15 defensive contributions per 90 minutes played. That gives him a pretty consistent floor of about 4 points. If you throw in clean sheets, throw in the odd attacking return like he did against Leeds, and he can jump to a very respectable score very easily. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not going to happen. So do not pick him up hoping for 8 and 9 pointers every week. It's not going to happen. But you're picking him up or you're considering him because you've currently got players in your team who are regularly doing nothing and posting 1s and 2s, and you could really use a safe pair of hands like Florentino. It's difficult to draw direct comparisons to someone like Florentino. And it almost depends on the template of your team. The types of players that I think you could be thinking about moving out are probably a lot of the other players who are lower down on this slide. For those of you watching on YouTube, the likes of Jeremy, Jorginho, Esteval. The minutes aren't guaranteed. The returns aren't guaranteed. They can be really frustrating. And if you're having a bad week, more often than not, they're only going to exacerbate that, and you sort of every 3 or 4 weeks, they're ticking over with a good week. So, as I say, I think it depends on the template of your draft team. This is where I want to quickly deviate away from the player picks and look at a bit of a template that I think is emerging in Draft FPL. Now, in FPL, just start with the basics. We've got 5 defender slots and 5 midfielder slots to play with, but not all of them need to be flashy, explosive, high risk, high reward players. So my idea, and I'm sure many of you, whether conscious of it or not, are possibly starting to do something similar anyway, is to think about dedicating 2 of each of those slots, so 2 of the defender spots and 2 of the midfielder spots, to what we might usually consider boring players, okay, of which Florentino would very much be in that category. So what exactly does that mean? What is a boring player? So they're a player who is more or less guaranteed to start and play 90 minutes every week. They do most of their team's defensive work and rarely blanks. They rarely score 1 or 2 points. So in other words, quite a low ceiling, but a very high floor. Think of them like your FPL safety net, able to chip in, and provide a very respectable score every week, even when your big guns misfire. Now, some of you, the cogs will already be spinning about some of the issues with doing that. So some of the caveats to that idea are, firstly, injuries. any attempt at a template or a structure to your squad in that way is dependent on availability. So 1 or 2 injuries to some of your bigger names that have to sit on your bench, and any of your best laid plans will go out the window. It does, of course, cap your upside as well. So you may not be able to brag about breaking the 100-point mark in a random game, but equally, you're probably saving yourself the embarrassment of posting up a nightmare single-figure game week, which does happen and has happened on a couple of occasions in my main league over the years. The other thing is reduced trade value. These guys, historically have been waiver fodder. So even though the scoring changes have boosted them, trades are often just as much about emotion as they are the numbers. And if you go and, try and offer up someone like Florentino in a trade, you're possibly not going to get the value that you think you should in return. The other one is stagnation. That's the other issue. It can be difficult to spot when these players actually start to be more of a hindrance and when they dip below the value line, because we're talking about such a tight range of scores, 4 points, 3 points, 5 points, 4 points, 3 points, 4 points. But if that average dips below 4 and they're picking up more 2s and 3s than they are 4s and 5s, then they need to go. But it can be hard to kind of make that call as to when they do need to go. So I've got this slide up. So I'll go through this for those listening. Calling this the Beige Brigade. So this is Florentino's on there, plus a whole load of other midfielders. So the names quickly: Florentino, Andre for Wolves, Viffa for Brighton, Caicedo for Chelsea, Xhaka for Sunderland, Anderson for Forest, and Cullen for Burnley again. Now, Caicedo on there, ownership in top 200 leagues is 100%. So you're not going to find a Caicedo in the waiver pile. Likewise, Xhaka, his ownership's gone up to 87% in more engaged leagues, and even in across all leagues is up at around 2/3 at 65%. The first 3 names on that list, though, and this list is ordered by their defensive contributions per 90. So as I said, Florentino is averaging just over 15 per 90, and in every game he's started, he's on a 100% record so far for picking up those extra 2 bonus points. Across all 10-team leagues, his ownership is 0.3%, and he's putting up 4.7 points per 90. Andre at Wolves is number 2, just under 14 defensive contributions per 90, slightly lower points per 90 of 3.6. I don't think he's got on the score sheet at all yet to boost up his average. Viffa is another interesting one. His ownership in top 200 leagues is 0%. So if we look at all the top 200 10-team leagues, Viffa is in the waiver pile of every single one of them. When he starts, he's getting 13.8 defensive contributions per 90, and he's averaging 4.6 FPL points per 90. Now, he has missed a few games with injury, and he's probably the least nailed on out of all the players in this list. But I do think Hertzler prefers him at the moment over most of the other right-back options, even though he's listed as a midfielder. Caicedo is just below him, 13.6 defcons per 90. Pretty good points per 90 average of 6.1 because of his goal scoring so far. That will probably regress a little bit, but still a very safe pair of hands. Xhaka not far behind. His points per 90, 4.6. Anderson, interestingly, he's got the lowest points per 90 at 3.3, despite averaging 12.5 defensive contributions per 90. And that is most likely because on a few occasions he got to 11, so he was just 1 short of the threshold, which obviously props up his average. But that's 6 points he was very close to getting, which if he had, would put him up nearer the 4 points per 90 mark. And then Florentino's teammate Cullen also getting over the 12 average of 12 def contributions per 90 and a points per 90 average of 5.3. So really solid numbers there from those guys, despite not necessarily being the usual names that we are considering. Of course, if we're talking about this kind of thing, we have to talk about the defenders too. This list is actually one less than the midfielder list because I did have Mavropanos on here because his underlying numbers were actually pretty decent. He then didn't start on Monday, came on at half-time and got injured. So I think probably safe to just leave him on this list for now. But the names on here probably won't be a massive surprise. Senesi, Mukiele, Virgil van Dijk, Anderson, that's Fulham's Anderson, Tarkowski, and Chris Richards for Crystal Palace. The lowest points per 90 here are Van Dijk and Anderson, with still a pretty respectable 4 points per 90. But all of their defcons average per 90 are well above the lower defender threshold of 10. Mukiele and Senesi averaging more than 12, same with Van Dijk. Anderson and Tarkowski are averaging just over 11, and Chris Richards just under 11. Now, the overall tallies, and the reason why the average points per 90 is slightly higher with these guys is because obviously with a clean sheet, they can really bump up their game week scores. That's then reflected in the value that we've been seeing already as draft managers, because if we look, their roster percentages for those engaged leagues are 100% for Senesi, 100% for Van Dijk, 99% for Tarkovsky, 99% for Richards, 86% for Anderson, and 82% for Mukiele. So these are really popular pickups and not that likely to be in your teams. I had Mukiele, I had him, so he really boosted my game score this week. I got 70 overall, him and Reece James doing a lot of the heavy lifting for me. And yeah, a player that certainly wasn't on my radar in pre-season, who is now being talked about as a player that is a must-have in most of your drafts. Just quickly, because I think there's also this other interesting group who I'm calling the hybrid players. So these are midfielders that can sort of do a bit of everything. So they can occasionally get the DEFCON points, but they're also able to tick over a little bit more regularly with the attacking threat. So right at the top of the list, Declan Rice and Enzo Fernandez, no surprise. Their ownership is currently 100%, and they're both averaging around 6 points per 90. Interestingly, Martin Odegaard is next on the list in terms of his points per 90, 5.8, but a limited sample size because of the amount of time he's missed through injuries. And a bit of a surprise to me, he's averaging 8.5 defensive contributions per 90, which, much higher than I would expect. And Jai's the other one, non-penalty expected goal involvement of 0.46, so almost 1 in 2, and defensive contributions of 10.7 for a baseline points per 90 of 5.5 is cracking. And a reason why he is a very popular pick. Bruno Fernandes, of course, is on there. His points per 90 only 4.1, but could be a lot higher had he tucked away the 2 penalties that he missed. And then really the poor man's version of these are Keita and Damsgaard, but they are certainly by no means must-haves, but are still putting up pretty respectable points per 90 figures of just over 4. So you've heard me harp on about, they're getting over 4 points. I think I mention it nearly every week. I kind of qualify why that is, but I thought this week, given that I'm going to talk about this stuff, why not see if I can get Draft FC Taz to dredge up a little bit of data for us, if you needed convincing, to convince you of why aiming for that number is important. So, again, I'll try my best to describe this for those listening on the audio. It's much easier for those watching on the video. But on screen, we have got data from last season, and for every single league size, we picked out the top half of those leagues for each respective league size, and we looked at how many points did the manager who finished first collect by the end of the season. So if you work out what all the top managers got, we can then average that out. You divide that by 38, because there are 38 game weeks, and that gives you this sort of average week-to-week score that manager posted in order to win and finish up first in their league. So if we look at the average size leagues, for 18 leagues last year, that number was 42, which is a little on the low side, actually. 10-team leagues, it was 41.7, just below. Obviously, the bigger the league, the fewer points that you're able to collect, so the points do get lower. So for 16-team leagues, if you manage to get over 37 points per week, you're being very competitive. Likewise, at the opposite end of the scale, if you were in a 2-person league, then you needed to get about 48 points per week in order to win. So as you can see from these numbers, 42, 40 points, you then divide that by 11, and you can see how if you're aiming for 4 points per player per week, you're going to be getting a very competitive team out there. So let's do exactly the same thing and look at the 25-26 data so far through the opening 8 game weeks. Now, what you'll notice straight away for those watching is that the points are much, much higher. Now, when we were about to look at these numbers, we were hypothesizing how many more points do we reckon are out there due to the scoring changes, and sort of assumed it would be an extra maybe 2-3 points per week, but it's a decent chunk more than that in some cases, and it's really brought in the range a lot more. So the gap between your 2-team leagues and your 16-team leagues is, at the moment anyway, as small really as it can be, which tells us a couple of things. One, there are just generally more points on offer. And 2, the pool of players that you're able to get a decent score from is much bigger, which is probably why we're talking about names that we've never spoken about before. So if we look at 10-team leagues, for example, as it stands, The average manager in first place is sitting on about 380 points. So if we divide that by 8, we get 47.5. So that would be their average week-to-week score. And if we divide 47.5 by 11, which would be their kind of man-for-man score in their team, it comes out at about 4.3. So those top managers at the moment are getting about, on average, 4.3 points for every player every week. So obviously that will balance out. You might get a 2 and an 8, a 6 and a 1, and it will average out. But that is the average. 16 team leagues at the moment, that stands at just under 45, so not far off. And for 2 team leagues, you're pretty much pushing 50. So pushing up towards sort of 4.5, 5 points per player per week, which is natural because the available players, you can basically have a whole team of first and second rounders as far as most of us other managers are concerned. So that is why the likes of, if I go back to the slides, the likes of Florentino putting up 4.7 points per week. Viffa, if you're sure he's going to start this coming week and he's putting up 4.6 a week. Xhaka, 4.6 points per week. Chris Richards putting up 4.5 points a week. Paqueta even putting up 4.3 points per 90. Damsgaard, 4.1. These are super valuable players. And if we move on and sort of get back to the midfielders, over the likes of Garnacho, Ahmad, Trossard, Jorginho, Yeremy, these guys are the ones who are going to be dependable and are more likely to win you your leagues come game week 38. So as much as this is the second time I'm recounting all this, as I said at the beginning, this is still very much a work in progress in my head. The other sort of big challenge to this, I suppose, is the idea, and it's an idea I subscribe to as well, is having that flexibility in your squad. So if you devote 2 of your midfielder spots, for example, to having Xhaka and Florentino, chances are the other 3 spots are going to be high-value draft day picks. It doesn't leave you a lot of week-to-week flexibility to stream midfielders who you think have got high upside for just maybe 1 or 2 weeks. So it could be that you do a bit of a hybrid of both of those versions where you have 2 or 3 spots that are kind of your season-long, hoping for big scores, and then 1 spot is for one of these dependable guys, and 1 spot you keep as a kind of week-to-week streamer. So and similarly with the defenders too. So yeah, I'll be really interested to hear your thoughts on all of that idea. And as I said, I've no doubt a lot of you will have been doing this naturally anyway, and will have accumulated some of these players by recognizing the value that they've been posting so far. But I thought it just needed to be said. And yeah, any sort of thumbs up, thumbs down to that whole idea, that whole concept, I'm more than happy to chat through in the comments and say this is not something that is fully fleshed out and that I'm going to live or die by. Just wanted to get it out there, throw it out into the mic, and see what you guys make of it. So that's enough of that. Let's kind of pick up the Gameweek preview proper. So in terms of the rest of the main picks, Garnacho for Chelsea, just 20% owned, and they've got a home game against Sunderland. Amad Diallo for United, he's got pretty good availability and seems to be nailed on start as it stands. They've got a home game against Brighton. Trossard, I think, should start at the weekend, given the continuing absence of Martin Odegaard. I thought Marino could be the one to step in. He still could this weekend. They've got plenty of options now. But a good home game against Palace. So if he was to start that game, or if the indications became clear that he would start that game, then a very useful player to have. Jorginho Ruta, who, as I said, was one of the most wavered out players last week, is still chipping in with attacking returns, but maybe not the best fixture away at United, given the form they're starting to develop. Yeremy Pino, the myth of Yeremy continues. His waiver stats are pretty funny. Every week, he seems to be wavered in and wavered out in equal measure. He continues to rack up the underlying data, but is just yet to get it over the line and post a decent score for his owners. All of Palace's goals at the moment are coming from the tried and tested right-hand side from Munoz and Ismail Assar. Away at Arsenal this weekend means we're probably going to have a few more outs than ins, but they've then got 2 home games against Brentford and Brighton following that before the international break, which may be more appealing to you. Personally, he's not one that's really ever interested me at any point. And for those of you that are currently holding him, I think it's inevitable he's going to be that sort of player who will be guaranteed to pop off the week that you get fed up and drop him. I think you're destined with that unless you just hold him forever. And then finally is Marmoush, whose ownership is still pretty high at 83%, but he is a player I still have, a lot of value in and still respect, and not least for what he can do when he's in and out of the team, but also the thing with Marmoush and with Manchester City, at any moment, if Erling Haaland was to pick up an injury, then Marmoush suddenly becomes their starting number 9, which we've seen at times. And so that adds a little bit of his value to me. A frustrating one, though. It would be nice to see him get a couple of starts to see that he can be reintegrated into that 11. But as I've been saying all season, and as you'll probably spot in the predicted lineups this weekend again, City are possibly still the hardest team for me to predict week to week at the moment. And now they've got quite a few players coming back from injury. That task is only going to get more difficult. In terms of forwards, Havertz is coming back. He's potentially back sooner than we thought. Gyökeres is very much blowing hot and cold. He had a good game in the Champions League last night, but hasn't really done as much as I thought he would in the league. And Arsenal have got some cracking fixtures. So, yeah, one to keep an eye on. He's one that I know some have been sitting on since draft day, and one that I know others have even been trying to pick up last weekend. Really depends where you're at and where you're at with your forwards. And if you'd rather hold someone like Havertz over one of the more, low value players that you just think is going to get minutes, then I wouldn't counsel against it. And then Solanke's ownership's just been ever so slightly creeping down, 88% at the moment. I think by the sounds of it, there's an outside chance he could make the bench for that Everton game. And then, hopefully get some minutes under his belt before the international break. And then after that November international break, hopefully he's got enough minutes in his legs to just, become the number 9 that Spurs need him to be at the moment. Into hidden gems. And so these are all players with generally less than 10% ownership. A Chelsea defender should be high up on your priority list. And judging by the Forest selection, Archie Ampong is preferred to partner Chalobah in central defence. A nice home game against Sunderland coming up at the weekend. Probably not as nice as some of you might have felt it looked in pre-season, given Sunderland's impressive start to the campaign. I wonder who called a good season for Sunderland, by the way. He's not going to get the DEFCON points, so you're really only banking on a clean sheet here, which is lucky, as he's got 2 from the 3 Premier League starts he's got. And if you just wanted a bit of coverage in the Chelsea defence, probably your easiest way in. Then got the Burnley centre-back to continue to tick along very nicely, and I'm sure one or more have been in and out of your team at some point already this season. Probably more just to look at as a one-week punt now. Got that game against Wolves. Clean sheet potential, but also DEFCON potential too. Esteve has hit the DEFCON threshold in 4 out of the last 5 appearances. He may be tracking quite low on your list, no thanks to that statistical anomaly, which was him banging in 2 own goals in the City game, which gave him a -2 total to dent his overall tally. And then next to him, Twanzebe seems to have come in and usurped Ekdal in the starting 11. So unless we see or hear anything otherwise, I would expect those two to pair up again at the weekend. Midfield, Emi Buendia, who, again, as we said, was one of the most wavered out last week. 3rd attacking return in as many appearances. Minutes are the issue, though. However, I don't think he can do much more to secure a starting spot at the moment. So I've got him penciled into my predicted 11. Next is Nico Gonzalez. If Rodri remains out, which seems likely, he's an opportunity for a boring pick this week. He's averaging just shy of the 12 threshold, 11.6 DEFCONs per 90. Absolutely nowhere near the goals, so just really a boring pick if you want some City coverage with a high floor. In terms of forwards, we've got a couple to talk about. Mark Goyu changed the game when he came on, and that's according to Draft SC Kieran, who, as we all know, is infallible when it comes to his Chelsea takes and predictions. So with Palmer sidelined for a while yet, we could see João Pedro starting in the number 10 role, which would then open the door for Goyu to actually start as the number 9. Would seem a bit cruel for him to line up against Sunderland. He obviously got sent there on loan at the beginning of the season, and then was recalled when Delat went down and Jackson moved to Bayern. So yeah, it'd be pretty a harsh narrative if he lines up against them and maybe scores the winner. The more attractive prospect, certainly for this week, if you're looking for a short-term striker pick, is Eli Krupi Jr. for Bournemouth. In the absence of Evan Nielsen, started his first league game at the weekend against Palace and scored 2, which brings his season tally up to 3 from just 95 minutes played so far. And at this stage, I know it's a bit cheap to compare goals, but his 3 puts him ahead of the likes of Chris Wood, Ollie Watkins, and teammate Evan Nielsen. Just to name a few. Those of you that have sort of been in the forward doldrums since the start of the season, maybe been swapping in the likes of Mayenda, Calvert-Lewin, Wilson, Barry, even Mark Goyu, for example. I think Ad Krupi is the next one on your conveyor belt. The news on Evan Nielsen's injury, I say, wasn't sounding that great, and he wasn't spotted in training, I think, this week either. So, a decent chance he could be their only fit striker to line up again at the weekend with a fairly decent game against Forest, who it's fair to say are going to be slightly unsettled. I'll sort of skirt over the Fantastic Four this week. I'll have a quick recap. Last week we had Bentancur scored 10 and Florentino got 8, which brings our average up a little bit to 3.83 and a season hit rate of 8 out of 24. I don't see much point in making the Fantastic Four's selection this week because the kind of players that we're discussing in this section are all of the ones that I was talking about in my sort of draft tactics template chat a minute ago. So really any selection of those, particularly the lower owned ones, I could throw on the list this week. So I'll maybe pick it up again game week 10 based on how well some of those guys do this weekend. First pass of predicted lineups have gone in yesterday. Once all of the European football is concluded tonight, or maybe even tomorrow morning, I'll do a final sweep to make sure there are no mistakes in my selections and just double check a few of those. A reminder, they're there for everyone. So if you search Draft FC predicted lineups, you'll be able to find those. Those of you who do become members, if you're not, you'll see the same predicted lineups, but it will have all of your draft league ownership data plumbed in directly to them. So if you flick through the predicted lineups at a glance, you'll be able to see who's available, who's been picked up, and what their ownership percentages are. So that will do. For the second time I'm saying that will do for the Game Week 9 preview. Another reminder, if you've never signed up, want the free month, use the code KICKOFF at checkout. Get full access to all of the Draft FC dashboard features, and more importantly, get yourself into the Draft FC Discord community, which, if you think any of our stuff is helpful, being able to chat and message and join in the banter there is probably just as much help, if not more. Yeah, so if you enjoy this stuff, if this is your first time here, do click the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on the audio, hit the follow button. The other way you can support us if you're one of the pod listeners is to leave us a review, only if it's a nice one, because that does help get the podcast out there a little bit more when people are searching for stuff. Those of you watching on YouTube, also give a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this episode. As I say, I'm really keen to hear some of your thoughts and engage in some chat. Chat amongst yourselves as well in the comments about your thoughts on that kind of template idea. As I said, lots of caveats depending on injuries, your league size, etc. But keen to hear what you think of those players. Obviously, the biggest thing really is the opportunity cost. Every one of those players, we have a finite number of picks we can have in our draft squads at any one time. So to devote one or two of them to the likes of Cullen, Florentino, Xhaka, etc., may not feel as worth it. And you may be hunting that upside a lot more. But comment anything below. Happy to get into it with you, as well as all your usual questions and queries about waiver pickups and trades. I will have a bit of time tomorrow afternoon, hopefully, because my car needs its MOT, so I'll be stranded with very little else to do other than have a scroll through the comments. If you want to follow us on social media, we're most active on X at draft_FC, so give us a follow on there too. And I'm going to leave things there because I've got to re-edit myself for another half an hour. So until next time, stay safe.